And today's project is all about putting this weird Nook space to work. And the best way to do that is to build some floating shelves. This is in my home office, and in my last video I actually built this filing cabinet cum printer stand that fits nicely down here. Now for the top part, we're gonna build some shelves. But before we get started, if you're new here, I am Annika and I am here to demystify DIY. And I am going to show you exactly how you can confidently use power tools and build anything you like. Now let's go. Now I have built a bunch of floating shelves before, one for my garage and a few for my kitchen. The one in the kitchen is super heavy duty and is still going strong 3 years later. Now for this Nook, do we really need to make it heavy duty? Probably not as heavy duty as for the kitchen shelves, but they do need to be strong enough to be future-proofed because we are going to be storing a few books on there right now, but who knows, things might change. So we are going to make sure that they're nice and strong and they are easy to make. Now, one of the most challenging things about a Nook like this can be trying to find studs that you can use. You want to have at least 2 spots where you can attach the boards to the wall so they are nice and stable, which means you need 2 studs on every side. And in my case, there are no studs on this back wall, there are no studs on this small side wall, and there is 1 stud in the middle of this big wall. I mean, there are studs, they are all in the corners, which we cannot use to attach to. So we're gonna have to use toggle bolts, and I'll show you all about that when we get to it. But for now, let's go ahead, measure, mark, and get to building. Once I marked the stud, I realized that the stud was actually outside the shelf dimension. Oh well. I used painter's tape to get a visualization of exactly where I wanted the shelves to go. Now first up, the frame for the floating shelves. This is built using 1x2 boards, which you can totally purchase, but I had a lot of scrap 1x12 boards from my closet demo, so I just ripped that down on my table saw and put it to work. And then I cut them down to size on my miter saw. Now, of course, if you are using off-the-shelf 1x2s, you can totally skip the whole table saw step and get to cutting them down. Now, since we are not hitting any studs at all of these boards will be attached to the wall using toggle bolts. To attach the toggle bolts, I started by making pilot holes through the 1x2s. Then I took these over to the wall, made sure that they were level and aligned, and drilled through into the wall. Now, the toggle bolt butterfly end is huge and needs to go into the wall, so I made 1/2-inch holes in the wall. This can feel a little scary because you're making these huge holes, but it is exactly what you need to be able to push that huge toggle bolt into the wall. Once they were in, I tightened the toggle bolt, making sure that the board stayed level. And of course, I repeated this for all of the 3 boards. It is important to have at least 2 toggle bolts to make sure that there are no pivot points and the shelf stays nice and strong. Of course, if you have studs that you can attach to, you can easily skip a toggle bolt and add a 3-inch long screw directly into the stud. Just make sure that you attach at least 2 points per board. Now at this point, you can add a plywood on top, you can add a board in front of it, and you'll be done with your floating shelf. However, I want to make it stronger and I want to make it future-proof because what if we put heavy stuff on it? You never know. So we're going to add another support in the middle here to keep the plywood from bowing. And if this was a much wider shelf, you definitely want to add another support in the middle. And I probably don't need it, but I'm gonna put it in just so you can see how that works. But for something like this, which is only about 18 inches wide, you don't need to worry about it. I made pocket holes on a 1x2 board and attached it to the side support using pocket hole screws. And by the way, if you are curious or want to learn more about pocket hole joinery, take a look at the description below. And I used a scrap 1x3 to add this center support. I obviously needed a small driver bit to get into that tight space. All right, now comes the next challenge, which is the fact that these walls are never straight, which means that you can't just cut a sheet of plywood and put it in. You have to take into account the variation. And in my case, there's almost a 1/2 inch difference between the back measurement and the front measurement. So in order to take all of that into account and really make a shelf that fits nice and snug, we are going to use a little trick, which is called making a template. I am using paper from my kids' art paper roll. Wrapping paper is another great alternative. I carefully stretched out the paper and traced the shelf onto it. Then I cut it out and I transferred that shape onto the plywood and cut that out using a jigsaw. You cannot use a circular saw for this because the cut lines are not straight and the circular saw blade can bite. All right, let's see how this fits. One of the things to remember is when you're making the cuts and with the jigsaw, you want to make sure that the front is actually the straight edge of the plywood because you want your shelf front to be nice and flat. So let's fit this in. Okay, it's just a tad too big. I think a little curved cut to trim this is going to make it work, but I can see that it's conforming really well to the wall right here. And I think once we trim this end of the board, it's going to look good. All right, let's try it. That fits really well, actually. There's just a tiny gap over here, extra gap, which we can't do anything about, but everything else conforms really nicely. So now I'm just gonna use this and cut the bottom 1/4 inch sheet, and then we are ready to put it on, put the trim, call it done. Tracing the 1/2 inch plywood to the 1/4 inch plywood is a piece of cake, and then I cut it down using a jigsaw. Also, as you are tracing and cutting, you want to make sure that you keep track of the top and the bottom of the plywood because each side is a different shape. Everything fits perfectly. So now I can go ahead and attach it using finish nails. Next, it is time for the front trim, which is a 1x2 board, which is attached using finish nails as well. The shelf is done and it's time to finish it up. So I taped up the walls, applied pre-stain conditioner, stain and top coat, and the shelves are ready. These shelves can be added to any nook or alcove as long as you have 3 sides. You can put that space to work for storage, like in a bathroom, a closet, a laundry room, a mudroom, so many choices. I am so happy that I finally got around to building these, and this weird nook is no longer wasted space. Thank you so much for watching, and here are a few other projects that you will enjoy.